Software usually gets updates. Sometimes it gets patched. Sometimes a company rolls back a feature and pretends the launch was always supposed to look like that. But this time, something different happened. An AI model got recalled. Not officially with that word. Functionally though, that is what happened. Anthropic launched Fable 5 and Mythos 5, two models it framed as a major step up in long-horizon coding, cybersecurity, science, and autonomous work. Then, the US government stepped in with an export control directive aimed at foreign national access. Because of how broad that restriction was, Anthropic said it had to abruptly disable the models for all customers. That is the headline, but it is not the whole story. The real story is not just that Anthropic had a messy launch, or that one AI lab collided with regulators, or that everyone is arguing again about open source. The real story is that frontier AI may have crossed a line where governments no longer treat it like normal software. They treat it like strategic technology. And once that happens, model releases stop being only a product decision. They become a national security negotiation. That is why this moment matters. Mythos may have become the first model to show the industry where the panic line is. Above that line, you do not just launch. You get reviewed. You get restricted. You get carved into approved access groups. And if the government flinches hard enough, you get pulled back after release. That is the new speed limit. And we just watched the first speeding ticket.
Chapter 1: The Recall.
The first thing to understand is that this was not a normal safety controversy. AI companies argue about safety all the time. They publish system cards, preparedness frameworks, and long interviews about open weights, cyber misuse, biosecurity, and national competition. This was different. According to Anthropic's own statement, the US government issued a directive citing national security authorities. The directive told Anthropic to suspend all access to Fable 5 and Mythos 5 by any foreign national, whether inside or outside the United States, including foreign national Anthropic employees. That last part matters. Because the order also applied to employees, compliance became operationally ugly very fast. Anthropic said the net effect was simple. It had to disable the models for all customers. That is why recall is the useful frame. Not because this is legally the same as recalling a car or a defective battery. It is not. But because the public experience was similar. A frontier model was released. Then, because of government intervention, normal access was abruptly pulled back. And the updated situation made the shift even clearer. Mythos 5 reportedly came back only for a small group of approved cyber defenders and infrastructure providers. Fable 5, the broader public-facing Mythos class model, appeared to remain in limbo. So the story is not simply banned or unbanned. It is stranger than that. It is the birth of a new access lane. Not everyone gets the model. Not even every paying customer. The model becomes a restricted capability, distributed through approved organizations under government pressure. That is a very different world from click here, pick a plan, start prompting.
Chapter 2: Why Mythos Triggered It.
The obvious question is, why this model? Because Mythos was not presented like a normal chatbot with a nicer personality and a slightly better ability to apologize for being wrong. Anthropic described Fable 5 as a Mythos-class model made safe for general use. It described Mythos 5 as the same underlying model, but with safeguards lifted in some areas for a small group of cyber defenders and infrastructure providers. That is not normal product copy. That is the kind of sentence that makes security agencies sit up in their chair. Anthropic's launch material framed these models as major steps forward in long-horizon software engineering, scientific research, biology workflows, memory, vision, and complex autonomous work. In other words, the scary part was not that the model could answer a trivia question faster. The scary part was that it could keep working. It could look across large systems. It could reason through long tasks. It could help find vulnerabilities. It could operate in domains where being 10% better is not just a benchmark win. It changes timelines. Then came the reporting that made the fear concrete. The Associated Press reported that a US official said an Anthropic model identified vulnerabilities in highly sensitive and secure US government computer systems during an authorized testing exercise. The official said the model identified certain vulnerabilities within hours. There is an important caveat. Identifying vulnerabilities is not the same thing as exploiting them. Finding a weak point is not the same as breaking through, moving laterally, stealing data, and doing the full cyber movie montage. But the government does not need a full movie montage to get nervous. If a model can rapidly find high-value flaws in sensitive systems, it is both a defensive tool and an offensive concern. That is the dual-use problem in one sentence. The model did not have to become evil, wake up, or declare independence. It only had to become useful enough in the wrong domain.
Chapter 3. The Gatekeepers Get Gated.
Now, this is where the Anthropic part needs to be handled carefully. This should not be an Anthropic bash video. It is too easy to turn this into company warns AI is dangerous, company releases powerful AI, government panics, everyone points and laughs. That is funny for about 10 seconds. Then it stops explaining anything. The better version is this. Anthropic did not make the government afraid of advanced AI. Eventually, governments were probably always going to flinch at systems that look this capable. Governments notice strategic capability. That is what they do. Anthropic's mistake was not creating the fear from nothing. The mistake was helping create the language and structure through which that fear would be acted on. For years, the closed lab safety argument has said some frontier models are too dangerous to release freely. Open models can be risky. The strongest systems should be controlled by trusted labs. There are serious arguments behind that view, but if you tell governments over and over that your product class is dangerous strategic capability, eventually the government may believe you. And once it believes you, it may not let you be the only gatekeeper. That is the twist. The gatekeepers are being gated. Anthropic may have wanted a world where responsible labs carefully control dangerous model access. The government seems to be saying, "Interesting idea, we will help with the controlling part." That does not make Anthropic evil. It makes the situation ironic. And it exposes the weakness in a strategy built mostly around trusted private choke points. If the whole plan is trust a few closed labs to control the frontier, then the obvious next question is, who controls the labs? Once frontier AI becomes too important to be treated like ordinary software, the government becomes part of the release process.
Chapter 4. The New Speed Limit.
This creates a weird incentive for every model after Mythos. The obvious race used to be build the smartest model, more reasoning, more context, better coding, better science, better agents. But after a recall-style intervention, a second race appears underneath the first one. Build the smartest model that does not trigger the panic line. That line is not official. There is no public chart where the government says, "Congratulations, your model scored too high on the forbidden benchmark." But unofficial lines matter. They shape behavior before anyone admits they exist. Mythos may have accidentally become that line on the wall. Above it, you risk recall, export control logic, approved customer lanes, and national security review. Below it, maybe you get a careful rollout and eventually broader access. That is where GPT 5.6 becomes interesting. OpenAI's preview post says GPT 5.6 Sol is its strongest model yet. It is aimed at coding, biology, cybersecurity, and long-horizon agentic tasks. It is also launching first through a limited preview for trusted partners, after OpenAI says the US government requested that preview path. So already, the release looks post-recall. But the key detail is the threshold language. OpenAI says Sol is better at helping people find and fix vulnerabilities than reliably carrying out end-to-end attacks. It says Sol does not cross the cybercritical threshold under its preparedness framework. It also prices Sol below Anthropic's listed Fable pricing. That combination is fascinating, powerful, carefully framed, useful for defenders, but not over the critical line. Whether intentionally or not, GPT 5.6 looks like a model designed for the new environment, not necessarily the maximum capability a lab can imagine. The maximum capability that can survive the politics around release. That may be the new frontier. Not just intelligence, political survivability. If that sounds weird, it is. But it is what happens when benchmarks become policy signals. The model is not only competing against other models, it is competing against the government's fear threshold.
Chapter 5: The Lockdown Paradox.
Now comes the part that makes containment messy. The capability does not disappear just because America locks one door. That is why the Z.ai story matters. Z.ai, also known as Zhipu AI, released GLM 5.2, a large, open-weight model with official downloads listed through Hugging Face and ModelScope. The official materials describe it as a massive mixture model with a 1 million token context window and strong, long-horizon coding performance. That alone would be interesting, but the sharper claim is the cybersecurity one. The Verge reported that some researchers claim GLM 5.2 matches Mythos in certain bug finding and cybersecurity scenarios, while lagging Anthropic and OpenAI in broader, general tasks. That wording matters. Not matches Mythos at everything, not China has solved all AI. The careful version is an open-weight Chinese model may be closing the gap on some of the vulnerability finding tasks that made Mythos sensitive. And that is enough to create the paradox. If the US restricts its most powerful cyber-capable models, but similar capabilities appear in open-weight systems outside US control, what exactly got contained? Maybe you reduced access to one American model, but you may also push developers, companies, researchers, and maybe adversaries towards systems that are harder for US institutions to monitor or shape. Open-weight models create real risks. If a model can be downloaded and modified without provider oversight, bad actors can use it too. But the opposite extreme is not clean either. If only a few closed labs control the frontier, those labs become choke points. And choke points attract control. So the choice is not safe closed models versus dangerous open models. The choice is between different failure modes. This is why the first AI recall is not just about Anthropic. It is about the structure of the next AI race. The future may split into approved frontier models, limited previews, safer public models, and open weight systems pushing from the outside. That is not a simple market. That is an access map.
Chapter 6. What happens next?
There is one more player to keep in the frame: Google. It is easy to make this story Anthropic versus OpenAI, with Z.ai as the twist. But Google should not be written out just because Gemini is not the loudest object in this news cycle. Google has DeepMind, TPUs, search, YouTube, Android, cloud distribution, and one of the deepest AI research benches on Earth. Quiet does not mean irrelevant. It may mean Google is watching the new rules form. In a post-recall world, silence can be strategic. Every frontier lab now has to think differently. Release too aggressively, and you may trigger review. Release too cautiously, and you may lose the market. Open too much, and you may get blamed for misuse. Close too much, and you may become the choke point. That is a brutal design space. The first takeaway is that frontier AI releases are becoming policy events. The second takeaway is that safety language has consequences. If labs argue that their systems are too powerful for normal release, governments may agree. The third takeaway is that containment is global. Restricting one US model does not stop similar capability from appearing somewhere else. So the question after Mythos is not just, was the government right? It is not just, was Anthropic wrong? The better question is, what kind of AI ecosystem are we building now? One where frontier capability is public, private, nationalized by pressure, or split between approved access, limited previews, and open weight systems? That is the real shift. The most powerful models are starting to touch export controls, national security, cyber defense, infrastructure, and strategic competition. That is what makes this recall matter. Not because one company had a bad week, because everyone else just saw the line. Anthropic did not make the government afraid of AI, but Mythos may have taught the government where to draw the line. Every model after it is now being built in the shadow of that line. Osiris Perseus is about exploring modern topics, from breakthroughs to other foundations of science, tech, and engineering. Subscribe to join the expedition.